didn't know until quite late, until we started working with scripts and things like that. And it just kind of worked out that I had a boy and Samantha had a girl. 30 years after Elizabeth Montgomery's death, her daughter Rebecca Asher shocked all of Hollywood when she revealed a letter from her mother that had never been sent. In it, Elizabeth wrote chilling words. "I forgive you, Father. Perhaps I am more like you than I ever thought." Those seemingly gentle words carried a lifetime of pain. Of a daughter rejected by her father, of a woman who loved until betrayal, and of a star who believed that only magic could mend a heart too full of cracks. And now, as that letter comes to light, one haunting question echoes around the world. Why did it take 30 years after Elizabeth Montgomery's death for her daughter to reveal the truth? Was it out of fear, or because they too believed that the Bewitched curse still exists and that no one has ever truly escaped it? Let's find out. Let's go back to 1951 when 18-year-old Elizabeth Montgomery stood before the gates of Hollywood and declared, "I will write the magic of my own life." But no one knew that this very sentence would mark the beginning of a lifelong tragedy. New York winter of 1951, the wind whistled through the long streets. And in a red brick house on East 60th Street, 18-year-old Elizabeth Montgomery stood before the biggest decision of her life. She had just signed her enrollment papers for the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, the very school her father, the famous actor Robert Montgomery, had sworn his daughter would never set foot in. Robert was a star of Hollywood's golden age, a sophisticated, confident, and arrogant man whose every word became law. In the family mansion in Beverly Hills, everything was arranged to perfection, cold and immaculate. Dinner was a ritual. Elizabeth had to sit straight, never speak unless spoken to, and was absolutely forbidden to mention the words acting or film. He often repeated the same line, his voice calm, but filled with disdain. Hollywood is no place for a decent woman. To Robert, art was the world of pretenders, and he would never let his daughter become one of them. Yet inside that strict household, Elizabeth's passion burned quietly, dangerous and unstoppable. From a young age, she had loved following her father to film sets. She loved the way light reflected on the actors' faces, the hum of the camera, like the heartbeat of another world, a world where people could live many lives within minutes. At 17, during a visit to the MGM studio, Elizabeth watched her father perform and whispered, "Daddy, I want to stand there in front of the camera like you." Robert turned to her, his gaze icy. He replied curtly, "No, I didn't raise an actress. I raised a lady." Those words cut deep like a knife. Elizabeth said nothing more, but in her heart she swore if her father wouldn't give her a chance, she would make one herself. A few months later, she secretly sent in her application, telling no one, leaving only a short note on her father's desk. "I'm going to learn how to live, not how to please you." When Robert found out, he exploded. The maid later said he threw the ladder to the floor, stomped on it, and roared. That girl will regret ever be bearing the Montgomery name. From that day, the house fell into silence. Father and daughter barely spoke. The air was so heavy that one could hear the sound of silverware striking porcelain at dinner. But ironically, it was Robert himself who unintentionally opened Elizabeth's first door to acting. When his TV show, Robert Montgomery Presents, premiered, he let her appear in a small role, a supposed gesture of reconciliation. However, on the day of broadcast, when the name Elizabeth Montgomery appeared on screen, Robert became furious. He lit a cigarette, narrowed his eyes, and ordered, "Erase that name from my show. No one uses my name to make themselves famous." The entire crew fell silent. That night, Elizabeth went home, locked her room, lit a candle, and wrote in her diary, "If my father won't let me bear the Montgomery name, I'll make the world remember it." From that moment, she chose her own path, a path with no room for forgiveness. She left home, rented a small apartment in Manhattan, worked nights, and studied acting by day. Every role she took, even the smallest one, was a silent act of rebellion against her father. Meanwhile, at Beverly Hills parties, Robert would coldly tell his friends, "That girl is no daughter of mine." Years later, when Elizabeth had become a television star, one of Robert's old friends recalled seeing him sitting alone in a bar, eyes fixed on a TV screen showing Bewitched. When Elizabeth Montgomery's name appeared, he smiled faintly and said hoarsely, "She's good, but she'll never escape my shadow." No one knew whether that smile held pride or bitterness. But to Elizabeth, it no longer mattered. She had won. She was herself standing before the camera as she had always dreamed. Yet the price of that freedom was her father's rejection and a wound she could never heal. Like a compass drawn by an invisible magnetic field named Robert Montgomery. The more she tried to escape, the more Elizabeth revolved back toward his shadow. And when she stepped out of her family's door into her own life, her love affairs began to trace that same pattern. Painful, recurring, and undeniable. New York, 1954. After 2 years of studying and performing in Manhattan, Elizabeth did what Robert had always wanted. She married Frederick Gallatin Kammerman, a young, wealthy businessman, the perfect gentleman by Montgomery standards. The wedding was small and elegant, held in New York at the start of spring, complete with white flowers, crystal glasses, and all the stability blessings Robert admired. It seemed Elizabeth had compromised. But just a few months later, the wedding dress hung untouched in the closet, and she stood in the apartment overlooking the Hudson River, realizing she had become someone's wife, not Elizabeth. Frederick was kind, polite, and attentive, but he wanted her to step back, leave the stage, and become a pleasant painting in an Upper East Side living room. By autumn, the marriage ended as neatly as it began. Elizabeth left New York with a sharp lesson. Love is never enough if the other person cannot accept your dreams. Los Angeles, 1956. On the West Coast, Hollywood lights burst like fireworks on the 4th of July, and Elizabeth fell into the arms of Gig Young, a famous actor, handsome, charming, dangerous. He had something she couldn't explain, power. That power, she would later realize, was the echo of her father. Hollywood whispered that at a Beverly Hills party in 1956. Robert coldly declared before a crowd, "She's no longer my daughter." If true, those words struck Elizabeth's heart like a hammer, and perhaps pushed her deeper into her affair with Gig, a choice both rebellious and self-punishing. Because beneath that charm lay alcohol, rage, and violence. Once on the Culver City set, people saw Elizabeth step out of a trailer with smeared lipstick and red eyes. Gig, with an icy smile, muttered through his teeth that she was too sensitive, to be an actress. That love was a slope slick with sweat and tears. When it ended, Elizabeth emerged like a survivor of a wreck, breathing but with a shard of glass in her chest that could never be removed. 1963, Malibu Sunset Gower Studios. Then came William Asher rising like the sun over the ocean. He wasn't just a talented director. He understood Elizabeth her rhythm. On set, the fear behind her eyes, the way she built her characters from invisible details. They fell in love through their work, and their work bloomed into an American television monument. Bewitched 1964. Los Angeles in the mid-1960s was an improvisational jazz tune. Vibrant, floating, unpredictable. Elizabeth Samantha twitched her nose on screen, and in real life, she and William had children, a family, and a television empire built around them. People said that on stage 5, the studio felt like a house with a warm kitchen. Elizabeth was pregnant. The scripts cleverly carried her real belly through humorous episodes, and William stood behind the monitor, smiling every time she caught the rhythm of the audience. It was the most beautiful time in Elizabeth's life, but also the moment when the Montgomery loop quietly began. Because William was not only her soulmate, he was also her metronome and sometimes her controller. He was brilliant, logical, and decisive. She was grateful for that until she began to suffocate. Inside, William was a refined replica of Robert, a certainty in himself so strong it consumed others without realizing it. When love gave way to production schedules, they began to miss each other. A compliment swallowed in the hallway. A hand reaching out on stage but not met. Beverly Hills late 1960s. Long parties, late-night phone calls, and whispers of William's infidelity slipped through the doors like midnight wind. Elizabeth said nothing, but in her diary she wrote a single dry line. "I like a man who pauses to hear himself breathe." At the edge, when the cracks had turned to fractures, Elizabeth sought a new rhythm beside Richard Michaels, the young director of Bewitched 8th season. In Richard, she found the gaze of someone who truly listened not to a star, but to a woman. They began a secret affair, and the price came swiftly like a clean cut on the Columbia. Screen Gems lot in 1972. Whispers turned into noise. When the secret went public, it burned through every remaining thread, connecting the cast, the crew, and the couple at the center of the storm. Bewitched ended abruptly in its 8th season, as if someone had flipped a switch mid-laughter. People called it the chain of betrayals. William betrayed first, Elizabeth later. And she, in a helpless instant, saw herself repeating what she had once despised in her father hurting other.